A wolf pup bit into my pant leg and wouldn't let go, and in the next hour that little wild creature would drag me straight from the edge of death into a moment I still can't explain. What he led me to changed everything I thought I knew about animals and about myself. When I felt something clamp down on my pant leg, my breath caught in my throat because I knew this wasn't an accident. It was just after sunrise. The forest was still wet with dew, and the air had that crisp, earthy smell only a September morning can carry. I had been walking the same narrow path I'd taken for years, basket in hand, scanning the moss for chanterelles and porcini. Every sound was familiar, the snap of a twig under my boot, the distant tapping of a woodpecker, the rustle of a squirrel in the leaves. This was my place, my quiet place. That's when it happened. A sudden, violent tug from below, so strong I nearly lost my balance. My heart lurched. I looked down, expecting maybe a stray dog or someone's lost hunting pup, but what I saw made my mind go blank for a second. It was no dog. Standing there, legs trembling, fur matted and thin, was a wolf pup, gray as ash, eyes wide and unblinking. His muzzle was pressed against my leg, teeth locked into the fabric of my pants. Instinct hit me like a punch. Wild animals don't do this. They bolt. They vanish before you even notice them. But this one, he wasn't letting go. "Hey, easy now," I muttered, trying to shake my leg gently free. The pup growled, not the deep, threatening growl of an adult wolf, but a low, almost desperate vibration. Then, just as quickly, he released me, sprang back a few feet, and, God help me, lunged again, grabbing the same spot on my leg, pulling even harder. It wasn't an attack. I could feel it. There was no rage in him, no snapping, no tearing at the skin. It was forceful, yes, but it was urgent. He pulled, stopped, glanced up at me, then yanked again. I stood there frozen for a moment, my mind spinning through every possibility. Maybe he was rabid? No? His eyes were clear? Maybe he'd lost his mother and thought I was some kind of savior? Maybe he was starving and confused? But there was something else. Something in the way he looked at me. Head slightly tilted, ears twitching, eyes fixed, like he needed me to follow. "Where's your mom, kid?" I asked out loud, feeling ridiculous. He didn't answer, of course. Instead, he let go again, darted forward a few paces down the narrow deer trail, then spun around, staring at me, tail stiff. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spoken English. "Come with me." I took one cautious step forward. He retreated a step of his own, eyes never leaving mine. Another step from me, another retreat from him. And so it went, this strange, silent negotiation between two creatures who had no business understanding each other. The forest felt different now. The usual peace had been replaced by something electric, something tight in my chest. I was following a wolf pup, for God's sake. Every nerve in my body was telling me this was wrong, dangerous. But my feet kept moving. The pup stopped again, came back to me, and grabbed my pant leg once more, this time pulling to the right, off the faint trail. The ground was softer there, uneven, scattered with roots and fallen branches. I had to watch my step, but he tugged without pause, glancing back every few seconds to make sure I was still behind him. That's when it hit me. He wasn't afraid of me, not in the slightest. In fact, it felt like I was the one being led, guided. This was no random encounter, no lost animal stumbling into my path. I don't know how long we moved like that, him pulling, me stumbling after, but I remember my mind starting to ease, thinking maybe this was nothing more than some weird fluke. Maybe the pup was just lonely or lost, and I'd walk with him for a bit, then turn back to my basket of mushrooms. I even let myself laugh under my breath at the absurdity of it. That's when a shiver crawled down my spine, because deep in my gut, I knew I was lying to myself. I thought he was just playing, or scared, or simply confused. I thought this little detour would end in a harmless story to tell back home over coffee, but nature was about to show me something else entirely, something I would never forget. The pup let go again, darted forward a few yards, then stopped, ears twitching, head turning just enough to make sure I was watching. And when I didn't move quickly enough, he came back, this time not so forcefully, and clamped down on my pant leg again. Not a bite to hurt, just enough to pull. It was the strangest sensation, being urged forward by an animal that should have been running from me. Every instinct told me to be careful. Where there's a pup, there's a mother. And if she was close, hiding in the brush, she wouldn't take kindly to finding a 60-year-old man trailing after her young. Still, something in that little creature's determination overpowered my hesitation. I decided to follow, but kept my senses sharp, eyes scanning the shadows, ears tuned to the slightest crack of a branch. We moved deeper into the forest, past places I knew well, the old cedar stump shaped like a chair, the patch of moss where I always found chanterelles. Then, beyond the familiar, into a part of the woods I had never walked. The ground here was less forgiving, littered with fallen logs and slick roots hidden under ferns. The pup didn't trot in a straight line. He moved in bursts, a few quick steps forward, then a pause to glance back at me. Sometimes he'd take 2 hesitant steps toward me before resuming his route, as if checking to see if I was still coming. That got to me. It was the same way a child might keep looking over their shoulder to make sure a parent was following. There was no fear in those glances, only a kind of recognition. He looked at me like I was one of his own, like we'd met before in another life. And I swear, in those moments when our eyes locked, I felt a quiet understanding pass between us. I didn't know what he wanted to show me, or why he'd chosen me, but I could feel that it mattered, to him, and somehow to me. We wove through a tangle of alder and spruce, the sunlight thinning overhead, until the world was mostly shadows and filtered green. Every few yards, he'd stop, sniff the air, and check that I was still behind him. If I slowed too much, he'd circle back, nudge my boot, or tug lightly at my pants before hurrying ahead again. It wasn't random. There was a direction, a purpose to every turn. I kept my distance just enough to give him space, but close enough not to lose him if he bolted. And all the while I kept glancing into the undergrowth, half expecting a pair of golden eyes to appear, the mother wolf, ready to defend her pup. Minutes stretched into what felt like half an hour. My breathing grew heavier, the forest floor damp and soft beneath my boots, but the pup pressed on without pause. At one point, he stopped entirely. His body went still, head high, nose working the air. Then he turned to me again, and in that brief second, I saw it, a flash of something deeper than instinct, almost relief, as if he was saying, "Good, you're still here." It's a strange thing, being led by an animal like that. You start to forget which of you is supposed to be the guide. I wasn't thinking about my mushroom basket anymore. I wasn't even thinking about time. My whole focus narrowed to that small gray body in front of me, slipping between the ferns, pausing just enough for me to catch up. A few times I told myself, this is madness. Turn back, but my feet wouldn't listen. Eventually, the trees thinned slightly, and a pale beam of sunlight broke through, falling across what looked like a small clearing ahead. The pup slowed, as though we were approaching some final destination, and I thought, this must be it, his den. I'm about to meet the rest of his family. The idea brought a strange mix of anticipation and unease. Maybe he needed help. Maybe the others were injured or trapped. Or maybe I just walked into a situation I'd regret for the rest of my life. I took another step, my boots crunching softly in the undergrowth, the light growing stronger on my face. I thought we were just walking to his den, but this was only the beginning. The trees began to open up, and soon we stepped into a small clearing no wider than a backyard. A fallen tree lay across the middle, its bark stripped away on one side, revealing pale, weathered wood. Moss clung to it in thick patches, and a few mushrooms had claimed the shaded side as their own. The pup stopped just before the tree, his body lowering slightly, tail stiff. He didn't grab my pant leg this time. Instead, he glanced back at me, then padded toward the log with a deliberate slowness, as though crossing some invisible threshold. I followed cautiously, my eyes scanning the edges of the clearing. A place like this could easily hide a den, a hollow beneath the roots, or a burrow tucked under the moss. Part of me expected to see movement in the shadows, other pups, or maybe an adult wolf, watching. My mind began forming its own explanation. This is it. He's brought me to his family. Maybe they're trapped somehow, or maybe he's just trying to get me close enough for them to smell me. Another part of me, more cynical, thought, or maybe he's been leading me in circles for no reason at all. The pup hopped onto the log, his small paws gripping the slick moss, and stood there for a moment, scanning the perimeter. Then he froze, completely still, ears perked, nose lifted to the breeze. Something had changed. I stopped where I was, my breath quiet. His whole posture was locked in focus. His eyes weren't on me anymore. They were fixed on something just beyond the clearing. The air felt different, denser somehow. Even the faint sounds of the forest seemed to hush. The pup didn't move. No tugging, no pacing, no beckoning. Just that rigid stillness, like a statue carved from ash and fur. His gaze was locked on the far side, where a wall of dense shrubs formed a dark, tangled barrier. I waited. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Minutes seemed to stretch. I shifted my weight, feeling a prickle of awkwardness. Maybe this was where the trail ended. Maybe he'd led me here for nothing more than a resting spot. And that's when the spell started to break. I glanced back toward the way we'd come, thinking about the basket of mushrooms I'd abandoned somewhere back there, the long walk home, the coffee cooling in my thermos. A strange mixture of relief and disappointment crept in. It occurred to me that maybe I'd been projecting too much onto this whole thing, the urgency in his pulling, the way he kept looking back. Maybe he wasn't guiding me to anything remarkable at all. Maybe he was just lost. The idea was oddly deflating. I let out a slow breath, glanced once more at the pup, still staring into the brush, and began to shift my feet, ready to turn around. "I guess you just wandered too far from home, huh?" I murmured. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet, and that's when it happened. The stillness shattered. In the next heartbeat, everything changed. The quiet broke with a sound that made every muscle in my body tense. From deep inside the wall of shrubs came a dull, heavy cracking, not the quick snap of a twig under a squirrel's foot, but the slow, deliberate splintering of something thick, wood giving way under weight. I froze. That was no bird, no rabbit. The sound came again, louder this time. A heavy shift followed by the wet thud of something pressing into the ground. My mind started racing through possibilities, and none of them were good. Boar? Maybe. I'd seen what those tusks could do to a tree, let alone a man. Bear? Worse. Out here, far from any help, you don't get second chances with a bear. I felt my pulse in my ears. The pup's head snapped toward me. For the first time since I'd met him, his composure cracked, his ears pinned back, his tail lowered. His paws shifted in quick, restless steps as though caught between fight and flight. Then, without warning, he sprang down from the log, rushed to my side, and clamped onto my pant leg again. Hard, not playful, not insistent in that guiding way from before. This was different, urgent. He yanked, hard enough to nearly pull me off balance, dragging me at an angle away from the clearing. "Hey, easy, easy," I hissed, but I followed. The sounds behind us were getting louder, more chaotic, branches snapping, the low scrape of something massive pushing through the undergrowth. The pup didn't look back. He didn't need to. Every fiber of him was bent toward one goal: getting me out of there. We cut through a narrow break between two thick pines, the ground sloping slightly downhill. My boots slipped on damp moss, but he kept pulling, darting just far enough ahead that I had to quicken my steps to keep him in reach. Something primal was building in my chest, not just fear, but the strange, dizzying clarity that comes when you realize you're prey. The sounds in the clearing shifted. A deep, guttural huff rolled through the trees, followed by another splintering crack, the kind of sound you feel in your ribs. I didn't need to see it to know. It was big. Big enough that the forest moved around it. The pup led me down a shallow gully, through ferns that slapped against my legs, then up the other side toward thicker cover. My lungs burned, but I didn't dare slow down, and then, just for a heartbeat, he stopped. Right there on the crest of the gully, he turned to me, his chest heaving, his eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. There was something in them that stripped me bare. It wasn't fear, it wasn't panic, it was pleading, and in that raw, silent moment, my throat tightened so fast it hurt. I don't cry easily, not for movies, not for bad news, but right then, in the middle of that wild, wet forest, with danger closing in, I felt hot tears sting my eyes. In his eyes was a plea so deep, I nearly broke apart right there. He gave one quick tug, almost gentle this time, and I understood. Move. We plunged deeper into the trees, the sounds behind us growing fainter with every step. My breathing was ragged, my legs aching, but I didn't let go of the urgency he'd given me. Somewhere, maybe 20 or 30 yards back, something heavy crashed into the clearing we'd just left. A final snap, a low grunt, and then silence. I didn't look back. We were still moving fast, the forest whipping past in a blur of greens and browns, when a sound rolled through the trees that made every nerve in my body seize. A deep, guttural rumble, not close enough to feel in my chest, but close enough to know it was meant for me. It was followed by the thud of something massive hitting the ground, then another, and another. Heavy, deliberate steps. The pup jerked on my pant leg again, harder this time, almost tripping me. I stumbled forward, trying to keep my footing, but curiosity and fear made me glance over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. Through a thin screen of saplings, stepping into the clearing we'd just left, came the dark, hulking shape of a bear. Not lumbering, not curious, moving with purpose. The morning light caught on its fur, a thick, matted brown. Even from here, I could see the size of its head, the swell of its shoulders. It stopped for a moment, sniffing the air, head swinging slowly from side to side. It was looking for us. My stomach turned to ice. In that instant, the truth hit me like a hammer. If I'd stayed in that clearing for even one more minute, maybe less, I wouldn't be standing here at all. The pup didn't let me linger in the thought. He yanked again, pulling me off the slope and into a patch of dense undergrowth. The ferns slapped at my face and arms, but I followed, ducking low to avoid the tangled branches above. The sounds behind us grew sharper, the crunch of deadfall under enormous weight, the dull scrape of claws against wood. I could picture the bear pushing through the shrubs, that massive body gliding where mine would thrash and stumble. The pup never looked back. He kept his head low, tail stiff, ears pinned tight against his skull. Every few steps, he'd give another sharp tug, as if reminding me there was no room for hesitation. We broke through a thicket and into a narrow game trail that sloped downward. My boots slid in the damp dirt, nearly pitching me forward. Somewhere ahead, I heard the faint trickle of water, a stream maybe, and then saw the dark cut of a ravine opening in the forest floor. The pup darted toward it without slowing, weaving between rocks and roots with the ease of something born here. I struggled to match his pace, my legs burning, my breath loud in my own ears. Behind us, the bear let out another sound. Deeper this time, a sound I felt in my spine. It wasn't a roar, but a low, vibrating moan that seemed to say, "I know where you are." My chest tightened, my vision narrowing as we reached the edge of the ravine. The drop wasn't sheer, but steep enough that going down without care could mean a twisted ankle or worse. The pup didn't hesitate. He scrambled down the incline, paws finding sure purchase on jutting rocks and thick roots. I followed as best I could, sliding part of the way, grabbing at anything that would hold my weight. The air here was cooler, damp with the scent of wet soil and stone. Only when we reached the bottom did I realize how far we'd come from that first clearing. The forest above was just a jagged rim of green and shadow. Down here, the world felt sealed off, hidden. The pup finally released my pant leg and stepped ahead a few paces, panting lightly, ears flicking at some sound I couldn't yet hear. He didn't seem relieved, just focused, as if there was still something I needed to see. I stood there, chest heaving, trying to make sense of it all. The image of the bear stepping into that clearing wouldn't leave my mind. The weight of the truth pressed hard against me. That little wolf had pulled me away from death, and yet, as he turned to face me again, eyes bright and unblinking, I felt it. This wasn't over. The tension in his small frame wasn't fading. I thought he'd just saved me from the bear. But it turned out that was only the first step. The pup moved ahead of me now, weaving through the bottom of the ravine with a new urgency. His paws splashed lightly through a shallow stream that curled along the rocky floor, his head swinging side to side as if tracking something I couldn't hear. Then I heard it, faint at first, almost lost under the sound of running water. A high, thin squeak, not the chirp of a bird, not the chatter of a squirrel. This was sharper, more desperate, a cry. We followed the sound deeper along the ravine until it grew clearer, more insistent. The pup broke into a trot, rounding a bend where the water pooled in a muddy hollow, and there, caught between a tangle of half-submerged branches, was another wolf pup. This one was smaller, his fur soaked and plastered against his thin frame. His hind leg was twisted awkwardly between two thick roots, his front paws scraping at the mud as he tried to pull himself free. Each movement drew another thin, pitiful cry. I froze, understanding hitting me like a jolt to the chest. The pup who'd found me, who had dragged me through the forest, pulled me away from a bear, hadn't just been running from danger. He'd been leading me to this, to him, not for food, not for safety, for help. I didn't waste time thinking about it. I waded into the cold water, the mud sucking at my boots. The trapped pup flinched when I reached for him, baring tiny teeth in a weak show of fear, but the other pup was suddenly there beside me, pressing close to his sibling's head, letting out a low, soothing whimper. "It's okay," I murmured, as much to myself as to them. My hands worked quickly, feeling along the roots until I found where the smallest gap was. The wood was slick with moss, the mud packed tight around it. I braced my foot against one root and pulled. The trapped pup yelped, the sound cutting through me, but then, with a sudden wet pop, his leg came free. He tumbled forward into the shallow water, scrambling upright almost immediately. The first pup was on him in an instant, nose pressed to his wet fur, sniffing and nuzzling as if to check every inch for injury. The smaller one leaned into him, their bodies touching, both of them trembling. I stood there in the cold stream, hands dripping, my heart thundering in my chest. I didn't know if wolves could understand gratitude the way we do, but what I saw in that moment, it changed something in me. The animal had shown me something that altered my whole life. This wasn't instinct alone. This wasn't a random act of survival. The little wolf had sought me out, a human, and asked, in the only way he could, for help. He had trusted me enough to lead me right to the heart of his world. The smaller pup shook himself, sending a spray of water into the air, then leaned his head briefly against my shin before darting back toward his sibling. The contact was so quick, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. The first pup looked up at me then. Just looked. No tugging, no pulling, no urging. His eyes were bright, alert, and for the first time since I'd met him, calm. It was as if a weight had lifted from both of us. I stepped back to the bank, my boots heavy with water, watching them huddle together in the shallows. The forest around us was silent again, the danger behind us, replaced by something far more difficult to process, the quiet enormity of what had just happened. Two small lives, one leading me through danger to save the other, and me, the unlikely piece in their wild, impossible puzzle. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if their mother was near or if I'd ever see them again. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I'd never walk into these woods the same way again. For a while, none of us moved. The two pups stayed close to each other in the shallows, their fur dripping, their thin bodies pressed so tightly together it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. The smaller one trembled with the aftershock of being trapped, but the bigger one, my guide, stayed steady, his eyes flicking from me to his sibling, as if silently confirming we were all still here. I expected them to bolt the moment they found their legs, to vanish into the shadows like the wild creatures they were. That's what animals do. They run. But they didn't. Instead, they lingered. The smaller pup was the first to move toward me, stepping hesitantly through the shallow water until he reached the bank. I stayed perfectly still, afraid that the smallest motion would send him darting away. He stopped at my boots. For a second, he just stared at me, head tilted, ears twitching, and then, in a gesture so quiet and simple, it rooted me to the spot. He lowered his head and rested his muzzle on the toe of my boot. It lasted only a moment, maybe two, but in that moment, the pounding of my heart was all I could hear. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else entirely. Acknowledgement, connection, as if he knew, as if he understood that I'd reached into that cold water for him, pulled him free, and that without me, this day might have ended very differently. I swallowed hard, not trusting my voice. My hands, still wet and cold, trembled at my sides. The bigger pup came up behind him then, brushing his side against his brother's before stepping forward himself. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. His gaze held me there, solid and unblinking, like a final wordless thank you before the world pulled us apart again. Then, with a sharp shake of his head, he turned. The smaller pup followed, their paws splashing softly through the water before they climbed up the far side of the ravine. I watched them go, their small bodies weaving between the roots and ferns. Twice they looked back, once halfway up, and again just before the crest, eyes catching the light in a way I'll never forget. And then they were gone, swallowed by the green. I stayed where I was, boots heavy with mud and water, my breath still uneven. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from running, but from the enormity of what had just passed between us. My palms tingled, my legs felt unsteady, as if they didn't quite belong to me anymore. It wasn't just the danger, or the bear, or even the rescue. It was the exchange, the invisible thread that had been strung between us from the moment the first pup clamped his teeth into my pant leg. I stood there for I don't know how long, the forest returning slowly to its usual rhythm around me, the soft trickle of the stream, the distant call of a jay, the whisper of leaves stirred by a breeze. Eventually, I exhaled, a long, shaky breath that felt like it carried the weight of the entire morning with it. I thought that was the end. I thought they'd disappear into the vastness of the woods, their lives continuing on whatever wild path they were meant to walk. I thought I'd never see them again. But fate Fate had other plans. Weeks passed before I found myself back in that part of the forest. It wasn't that I'd avoided it, at least not consciously, but every time I thought about returning, something inside me hesitated. The memory of that morning still lived under my skin. The bear, the cold water, the two pups pressed together in the shallows. It felt almost wrong to go back, as if I'd been granted a moment I wasn't meant to trespass on again. But one crisp afternoon, the pull was too strong to ignore. The air was cool enough to bite at my cheeks, the forest floor scattered with early fallen leaves. My basket swung loosely at my side, more an excuse to be out here than a real plan to fill it. The trail was quiet. I moved slowly, following the turns I'd memorized without meaning to. The leaning cedar, the patch of moss shaped like a map of some forgotten country, the gap between two spruce trunks that opened into the gully. When I reached the rise just before the clearing, I stopped. My breath was steady, but my heart had started to thump in that deep, deliberate way it does before you step into something unknown. And then I saw him. On the far edge of the clearing, where the sunlight spilled like liquid gold through the trees, stood a wolf. Not a pup, not a shadow glimpsed between branches. A full-grown wolf, tall and lean, his coat a blend of ash and silver, every line of him sharp with strength. He wasn't moving. He wasn't prowling or posturing. He just stood there, his head high, his eyes locked on me. I froze. Every instinct told me to lower my gaze, to back away slowly, but I couldn't. There was no threat in his stance, no stiffness in his shoulders, no baring of teeth, only recognition. It hit me all at once, not in my head, but in my chest, like a memory I didn't know I had. He looked at me as if I was one of his own. We stayed like that for what could have been seconds or minutes, neither of us moving. I could hear my own breath, the faint rustle of leaves high above us, the almost silent hum of the forest breathing around us. I didn't know if he was the father or the mother of those pups. I didn't know if wolves could remember faces the way we do, or if I was just a figure tied to the scent of that day. But in that steady, unblinking gaze, I felt the same invisible thread I'd felt with the pup, the sense of something understood without being spoken. At last, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head, casting one last glance over his shoulder before stepping into the shadows of the trees. His movements were unhurried, almost ceremonial, as though the leaving was just as important as the standing. I stayed rooted to the spot long after he was gone. The light in the clearing dimmed as the sun shifted, and still I didn't move. My mind replayed that silent meeting over and over, the calm in his eyes, the quiet certainty in his posture. Whatever had passed between us that day, I knew it wasn't chance. And it wasn't over. I didn't move for a long time after the wolf disappeared into the trees. The forest closed in around me again. The rustle of the leaves high above, the distant tapping of a woodpecker, the faint stir of wind threading between trunks. But everything felt different. The air, the light, the ground under my boots, or maybe it was me. Because in that moment, standing alone at the edge of that clearing, I realized that what had happened weeks ago wasn't just some wild encounter to tell over coffee. It wasn't an odd memory to tuck away and pull out at family gatherings. It had changed me. That day with the pups, with the bear, with the cold water clinging to my boots. It had rewritten something in me so quietly I didn't notice until now. I had seen the wild not as something to fear or conquer or keep at a distance, but as something capable of thought, choice, and, God help me, kindness. The image of the adult wolf's eyes burned in my mind. They weren't the eyes of a predator sizing up prey. They weren't the wary, watchful eyes of a creature weighing fight or flight. They were steady, knowing. In them, I saw more than one thing: gratitude for pulling his pup's brother from that tangle of roots, trust, the kind you don't get by accident, not from a wild animal, and something else, a warning maybe, a reminder that the line between life and death in the wild is razor thin, and that day, we'd both walked it. The pieces slid into place with a kind of quiet inevitability. The pup had saved my life. He'd dragged me out of the clearing just ahead of the bear, not running for himself, but pulling me along with him. Without that, my story might have ended there among the moss and the broken branches, and I had saved his brother, pulled him from the trap of those roots before the cold or the water or the bear finished the job. It was an exchange, not one you could plan, not one you could explain away as chance. Life for life. The kind of trade that carves itself into you, whether you want it to or not. I walked a little further into the clearing, my steps slow, my eyes searching the shadows where the wolf had stood. It was empty now, but I could still feel the weight of that gaze on me, as if some part of him was still here, watching from beyond the trees. The truth was, I didn't know if I'd ever see them again. The pups, the adult wolf, any of them. Maybe this was the last time our paths would cross, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that it had happened at all. And as I stood there, the hum of the forest wrapping around me, I felt something unexpected press in, a kind of humility I hadn't known in years, the knowledge that there are forces, bonds, and understandings in this world that don't require words, and that I had been part of one. I let out a long breath, my legs suddenly heavy. The tension of weeks seemed to drain all at once, leaving me almost hollow. I crossed to a nearby stump, its surface smoothed by years of weather, and sat down slowly. For a long while, I just listened. To the creek murmuring somewhere in the ravine, to the breeze stirring the last few green leaves above me. My hands rested loosely on my knees, and I found myself shaking my head, not in disbelief exactly, but in that strange, weightless place where disbelief and awe meet. Finally, I whispered it out loud, the words catching in my throat as if they didn't want to leave. This doesn't happen, but I saw it myself. I sat there until the light began to fade, letting the forest keep the rest of the story. Because some things aren't meant to be explained, only carried. And this was one of them. If you believe in a special connection with animals, right, we are not alone in this world.